back 4 years ago to the 23rd of March 2020.
The Prime Minister has announced the most drastic limits to our lives that the UK has ever seen in living memory.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
The aim, he says, is to save lives in this time of national emergency. Without a huge national effort, Mr Johnson has made it clear there will come a moment when the NHS will not be able to cope and more people will die.
None of us have ever heard a message like it. No politician alive could ever have imagined delivering it. And that's because the coronavirus crisis is a situation that the country has simply never faced anything like in living memory.
Well, as you'll remember, restrictions were brought in that changed all of our lives as COVID gripped our country and, of course, the rest of the world. Well, Gary Alexander is from Hampshire and was already shielding alongside his wife, Juliet, who was extremely vulnerable. Now, Juliet had sarcoidosis, which is a rare condition that causes small patches of swollen tissue to develop in the organs of the body. Now, Juliet's condition got so severe that she was confined to one room upstairs in her house and had to sleep sitting down with a pillow at her desk. Juliet sadly died in August 2022. Well, the 4th anniversary of the COVID restrictions. On this day, Gary has been speaking to our reporter, Ed Salt.
And that was our wedding party.
At his home in Hartley-Wintney, Gary Alexander is surrounded by his wife's favourite teddy bears, certificates for celebrating her fundraising, and of him and his wife Juliet together in happier times.
We got on so well. I think a lot of families during lockdown had a lot of challenges, but we got on so well. We hardly fought, we hardly argued. So in retrospect now, it was kind of nice that we had that extra time together.
It's in this very house where Gary spent almost 3 years shielding with Juliet when COVID restrictions came in.
Actually, we started shielding in the December, or rather Juliet did, and I started shielding a month before the country went into lockdown. We'd heard the stories about what was going on in China. Because Juliet was immunosuppressed, we took the decision to have me work from home for a month until the whole thing blew over in a few weeks. 2.5 years later, we were still shielding.
Sadly, Juliet died in August 2022, not from COVID, but from her condition called sarcoidosis.
The immune system would attack healthy parts of the body or healthy organs of the body, seeing them as a threat, as a foreign threat, and so they would attack them. So that can be any organ. It can be your nervous system. It can be your skin. In Juliet's case, it was her lungs, and it caused a great deal of scarring. You know, I'll never forget Juliet leaving the house for the last time on the way to hospital. It was a lovely sunny day. She couldn't lie down, so she'd been sleeping upright in a chair upstairs, and she couldn't come downstairs. So the paramedics carried her down and took her out on a stretcher, and she was just looking around at the garden, and everything was in bloom, and she was basically waving goodbye, and she said, "I'm not sure I'll come back again," and unfortunately she didn't.
My husband puts the blanket on me and I go to sleep like this. That's how I sleep at night.
I interviewed Juliet many times as part of her long campaign for a drug called Eversheld. Juliet's weakened immune system meant she was immunosuppressed, and COVID vaccinations didn't give her enough protection.
I'm not protected from the vaccines because I can't make antibodies because I'm on immunosuppressant drugs. So having a prophylactic like Evershield is very important to people like me because we get frontline protection.
This was Juliet in May 2022. Although the medicines regulator gave approval for Eversheld in the same year, NICE, which is the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, which is responsible for deciding which drugs and treatments should be available on the NHS, said there was not enough evidence of its effectiveness against COVID-19. 4 years on, what does Gary think Juliet would make of where we are with coronavirus today?
I think she would have been calling you on a weekly basis to say, I can't believe that society is just carrying on as if nothing's happening and COVID doesn't exist anymore and it's all over now, because it isn't. She would have become more and more frustrated that the government and society had kind of pushed COVID to one side and forgotten about the CVs, and she would have been very vocal in trying to continually promote the fact that there are many people still shielding after 4 years.
The UK Health Security Agency says the Office for National Statistics continues to publish the number of COVID-related deaths weekly, where data is available.
Had Juliet still been here, I would still be shielding. So I do check myself from time to time as I'm going about my daily life. I know that there must be many, many people in Juliet's position who are still having to shield after all this time. Must be awful.
So, a report there from Ed Salt. By the way, more on South Today on the telly tonight at 6:30. But let's stay with this just for a moment. Mark Oakley campaigns for forgotten lives. They're an advocate for the protection of those who are immunocompromised. And Mark, I want to pick up on something that Gary said in that report, and that he said he would still be shielding today if his wife was still alive. And I wonder, for those people that you represent, what is life like today?
Good evening. Thanks for having me on. They're now going into their 5th year of living like this. Many are still shielding. Some are living a restricted life, so they are out and about, but they're having to take precautions, avoid things like busy shops, public transport. They're even avoiding healthcare settings because there is a lack of consideration for people that are in this position. It's extremely difficult for them. It affects not just them, but their family members as well, just like Gary, because they have to protect their loved ones. And it places a big mental toll on them. You know, this is going on. We're going into half a decade, and it's just beyond belief, really.
I wonder, what do you think needs to change?
The biggest thing that needs to change is to give them protection. You know, we have got a chink in our armour. It is not anybody's fault they are in this position. You wake up one morning and your life just gets turned upside down. Your body's decided to do something. You might have contracted cancer. You might need a heart transplant because one of your organs has started to fail. It's not a lifestyle choice. It's something that happens to your body. And so you are in the most vulnerable position as it is already. Recent studies have shown that people that are immunosuppressed can be up to 14 times more at risk from COVID and a seriously bad outcome. So they need protection, and there are drugs available. There's another version of Evusheld that has gone through trials successfully and is once again going through the lengthy authorization and assessment process in the United Kingdom. There is also another drug that has just been approved in the United States under emergency legislation by another company. We could do the same in this country. They have talked many times of learning lessons from what has gone before and from the COVID inquiry, etc. And it just seems that we've gone back to 2022 again with these new drugs, and we are stuck here waiting. And if we cannot get these processes speeded up, then the people that need them by the time it is approved and rolled out are going to be sitting on the other side of next Christmas waiting for this drug.
On that subject of the COVID drug Evusheld, well, in the UK in 2022, due to a lack of evidence over how well it worked against the Omicron variant, that rollout was shelved, as you did mention before. However, since then, the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence announced in November last year that it's going to start this fresh appraisal into the drug in February. This directly affects you, Mark, doesn't it? And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what life is like for you, what happened to you.
So I've got this very much the same condition that Juliet had. I've got sarcoidosis. It affects my lungs and other parts of my system. I shielded for just under 1,000 days. I lived separate from my family at various points in a summer house, because when we had COVID in the house, when the children were back at school and being pinged as contacts, we had to take precautions to protect me. It placed immense strain on us as a family. I lost my business, and my children were genuinely worried every day that they would go to school, see their friends, and in the back of their mind was, am I going to bring this home and cause dad to be ill or even worse? And so it was a really difficult way to live. I don't recommend it to anyone. I accessed Evishield privately, and I have continued to do so. And I was actually up in London today to have my latest shots, which coming in at around £2,000 a time is a hell of a lot of money when you've got to do that every 6 months. We've had to make sacrifices to do that. But to have the chance to get back to some sort of normality for my family and for me, unfortunately, it's a price that's been worth paying. But we can't keep on doing this and watching our savings dwindle and our income dwindle because of it.
Mark
So
Oakley.
it's been really difficult.
Mark, thank you. Mark Oakley campaigns for Forgotten Lives, who advocate for the protection of the immunocompromised. He was talking there about privately accessing that COVID drug, Evishield. I must say that if perhaps you are thinking about doing the same thing, make sure you speak to your medical professional first. The other thing that I wanted to mention on this matter is we have heard from the Department for Health and Social Care. They say throughout the pandemic, the government acted to save lives and livelihoods, preventing the NHS from being overwhelmed, and delivered a world-leading vaccine rollout which protected millions. We have also said there are lessons to be learnt from the pandemic and are committed to learning from the COVID-19 inquiry findings. Well, I wonder if you are affected by what we've been talking about today, if you or your family are immunocompromised. As we look back 4 years from the start of those COVID restrictions which gripped the country, what is happening for you now? Your thoughts very welcome on the WhatsApp.